So we're going to hear from Nick himself about, well, I don't really need to say very much because Nick has said quite a bit already this morning, but I just wanted to, he's incredibly inspirational. After having his diagnosis 5 years ago, he's made huge lifestyle changes, and that's what today is really all about, is communicating what those changes were and how we can all take away, even if we're not ill, how we can actually improve our health and improve our outcome for the future. So, and Nick, thank you so much for organising today as well.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And one of the things is I'm going to take those extra 2 years that you gave me. It's been 3 years since my diagnosis, but I'm going to take the extra 2 because I will do it. Is the clicker somewhere? Oh, it's here. Okay. Yeah, so it was 3 years ago, September, when I got out of bed and my long bones in my legs were just aching as if I'd run a marathon through the night. I left that September without just thinking too much about it, and then about a couple of weeks later I had this really a crippling pain under my rib cage here. It lasted about 6 hours. I was in bed. I left that and didn't think anything about it. Of course, I mentioned it to my wife. A couple of weeks later, and the pain just ran across the top of my shoulders. And then, sorry, I've just got to do one thing. I'm going to keep talking. And then I was starting to get very confused about my diet. I wasn't sure whether I was nauseous or I was hungry. I was switching between constipation and diarrhea. It was just a really strange sense of sensation. So I went to the doctor and I got 3 pills, one for my bone ache, one for my constipation, and one for my nausea. And told to come back in a few weeks' time. I came back in a few weeks' time, nothing happened. And by this time my peeing was getting a bit weird. I was constantly up all night peeing the whole time. I was getting headaches and lots of nausea, foggy brain. My wife said, stop being a bloke, just go back to the hospital again. I went back to the hospital again and I went to a urologist, and the urologist said, poked me around and said, this was about October. And they said, well, you're just an old bloke, you're 50, you've got a viral infection which you're finding difficult to shake off. Didn't shake it off, surprise, surprise. Had some blood tests showed my liver markers all over the place. And so there were no answers for me, and my wife was encouraging me to do things that blokes don't usually do. Blokes, well, me in particular, are very good at sticking my head in the sand. And so she said to the doctor, Nick needs a scan. So they put me in a scan for January, and she said, no, January's not good enough, you need a scan earlier than that. So I had a scan before Christmas. I had a telephone call on Christmas Eve. And they said, you need to come in, Nick, because the scan results are too difficult to explain over the telephone. So you need to come in and talk about your scan results. So these are my scan results, and the first thing that I thought they were going to say to me is that, Nick, if your spine was straight, you'd be 6'6" rather than but actually, what they said to me is all of these strange mottled things in your skeleton, because that's a picture of me that way. All these strange mottled things in your skeleton is cancer. You've got metastasized. Well, in fact, we don't know it's metastasized, but you've got cancer in your bones. We think it's a secondary cancer. We think there's a cancer somewhere else. So if that's the case, this is metastasized cancer. So we're going to look for some cancer somewhere else. So I took some blood tests, and I had my blood results on the day after Boxing Day. The day after Boxing Day, they said, yes, okay, Nick, we've looked for the cancer and you've got prostate cancer. We found this thing in your blood which is called PSA. PSA is prostate-specific antigen. In normal men, the PSA number should be below 4. It's something that's emitted by your prostate, and it should be below 4. In normal men, it's below 4. But yours, Nick, is 625, which is 150 times normal. And they said not only that, it's highly aggressive, it's advanced, it's metastasized all over your skeleton. And I'm afraid there isn't anything that we can do other than put you on palliative care. And I didn't even know what that word meant, so I looked it up, and it means end-of-life care. And they said we can't operate because it's escaped your prostate, and we can't give you radio because the radio will kill you. But we can give you the gold standard. The gold standard is to give you a jab in the bum every month, which effectively chemically castrates you, knocks out your testosterone, and you can have some chemo for 6 months. So I did that. And they said, you can do some clinical trials, and I phoned around the world about clinical trials. I said, what about these clinical trials? If I was your brother, would you advise me to do the clinical trials? They said, yes. I said, well, why? They said, well, they're clinical trials, but we think you might get an extra 11 months. 11 months? What are you talking about? You said 11 years, maybe. And I said, what about the side effects? They said, well, we don't know about the side effects because that's why it's a clinical trial. I said, well, can you just reassure me, say the clinical trial, the side effects won't be permanent? They said, no, we can't tell you whether it won't be permanent. I said, well, okay, I'm not doing them. I just prefer to see what happens as they present themselves. So I said to the doctor, doctor, so why? Why was it me? And he said, just because you're unlucky, Nick, you were born with Duff genes. I said, bollocks to that, because if I believed that, it would take all my hope away. I was confined to a mahogany box if I was born with Duff genes. So I just decided that I created a cancerous environment inside my body and that I was going to uncreate it. I didn't know how at that point. Actually, I did know. Since diagnosis, I was reading all through the night, and I was a vegetarian. In fact, I was an extreme vegan by Boxing Day. All I knew was I'm not a man for statistics, but they bandy around a 5% chance of getting to 5 years, and and that's if you take the treatment. And I'm not interested in statistics, but I just knew if I worked harder than I'd ever worked before, at least I would have a chance of getting one of those 5 tickets out of town. So I was going to work harder than I'd ever worked before. When you're kind of at the edge, doing some things that no one's ever done, I've often found myself, I get to some conflicting advice. So the only way that I can get to past conflicting advice is to create some philosophies for myself. And I then go back to the philosophy and say, does philosophy, whatever, suggest I go option A or option B? I thought I'd share some of these with you. I know that Claire talked about how cancer isn't all genetics that you were born with, and there's things called epigenetics, which are actually switches that you can switch off gene function by your activity. That's different from genetics that you're born with. Claire talked about maybe 38% of cancers can be related to lifestyle. This talks about lifestyle and environment, and it's saying that something between 90 and 95% of cancers can be corrected through environmental and lifestyle changes. Whatever the numbers are, I've just chosen the bigger number I can find because I want something positive and something hopeful. William Blake, who's the amazing guy who wrote that hymn, Jerusalem, he's also a great philosopher. And this is something that I have had to hold dear to my heart, and I enact it every day. The true method of knowledge is experiment. And when you're at the edge of existence, sometimes it's quite squeaky bum time, but I really believe in that. Sorry that you can't see all of these, but I've decided that actually there's probably 15 journeys that I need to travel the whole time. 15 areas that I need to look at in my journeys of health. Nutrition, emotional competence, stress management, sleep, understanding my disease. I put them all into a wheel that I call my wheel of complete wisdom of being. And it's a wheel because it's something that, for me, it sort of denotes a perpetual motion, something I've got to keep revisiting, something I've got to keep moving forward on. We're going to look at 4 of those things, of those 15. We're going to look a little bit about my experience of nutrition, my experience of sleep, my experience of stress management, and my experience of exercise. Another one of my philosophies is this philosophy of marginal, aggregation and marginal gains. These 3 people here, the top one is Sir David Brailsford. He was the guy who was the leader of the cycle team at the GB Olympics in 2012. He was responsible for his teams, men and women, winning 70% of all gold medals at that Olympics. The next guy down is Sir Clive Woodward, who was the guy who won the World Cup for us in 2003. And the last guy, the swimmer, is Adam Peaty, who keeps smashing his own world records. All of those people live by the aggregation of marginal gains that says there's nothing, one thing that's single importance. You've got to do it all. You've got to do it all. And you can't find one silver bullet where you're going to make a 100% change. You're looking for 101% changes. So the accumulation of 101% changes is much easier than finding that silver bullet of 100% change. Of course, one of the things that I'm trying to do as well is trying to move to a natural life and to natural treatments. The NHS solutions, chemotherapies and things have their place, but they're pretty brutal. So I am moving towards that way, and I have experimented with cannabis in some various forms. And of course I'm eating a lot of vegetables, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in the middle, in the bottoms of the internet, I found this amazing thing, this amazing science called off-label drugs. Off-label drugs are drugs that the NHS is not allowed to prescribe because they have not been proven, they haven't gone through clinical trial for the treatment of cancer or any other disease. But for example, the researchers in Denmark looked at the diabetic population in Denmark and they compared them to the non-diabetic population in Denmark. And they found the diabetic population in Denmark had less incidence of cancer than the normal population. And that's because they were taking a drug called metformin for their diabetes. And metformin is about glucose control. And cancer, guess what? Lots of cancers are about glucose management. So actually, you can get off-label drugs, things like metformin, to control cancer. You have to go some other places in the NHS, but there are other routes. This is one of my favourite slides. It usually gets a snigger from the audience. Unfortunately, most of us are kind of, if this is the evolution of man, most of us are here, eating nutritionally depleted foods, energy-intensive foods, leading sedentary lifestyles, always, always, always attentive permanently on to this bloody thing called a phone or social media. We're leading a life of permanently on. And yet, this person here, the person that scientific suggestion says that we would descend from, this person here, the first person walking on two hind feet, is 6 to 8 million years ago. 6 to 8 million years of evolution to do things which actually we've forgotten what to do. We've forgotten how to eat properly. This person that we are now, eating these fast foods, processed foods, leading sedentary lifestyles, that's the last 50 odd years. We have come to lead lives that as creatures we're not designed to live. I love this. So this is a picture of the Buddha with many, many hands. And that's because Eastern traditions, they think that actually there's so much going on in life. There's so many things going on in life. It's so difficult. You Westerners, you think there's single cause and effect. There isn't single cause and effect. It's all happening. It's all happening at the same time. This reduction thing, this reductionism that you're into, cause and effect, it's much more complicated than that. Your mental health affects how you process your food. It's not just about what you put in your mouth. It's all interrelated. I really like to hypothesize about what my cancer was. I think when I do my research and I'm thinking about my next movement, I'm thinking, right, I'm going to make a hypothesis and then I'm going to go and prove it or disprove it. My hypothesis was that I'm a highly stressed person. That's my hypothesis. I have lots of evidence of that. So I took some swabs of my spit. And this is the results. So this first one is early in the morning, this is mid-morning, this is mid-afternoon, and that's late in the afternoon. And if I am a relaxed person, this is my cortisol markers. My cortisol should be in this green band, like the red line, through the day. But you can see, for me it starts high, stays high, and only drops when they start to go to sleep. I am a highly anxious, stressed person. I hypothesised that, and that's the scientific evidence. And if I look back on my life, this is me going to school age 7, actually maybe 13, but I'd gone away to boarding school age 7, so, you know, I was anxious to conform and please my parents, no fault of my parents, but I was a highly anxious person. Here I am, fat and sort of 40 years on, thinking, you know, I'm going to strive to be on the front cover of a magazine that no one's ever heard of. You know, it's, I was leading someone else's life, not my own. And if I look back, this is me in 2005, where the London Marathon had asked me to run for the heart team because I had high blood pressure. I had high blood pressure. My blood pressure was 220 over 180 at that time. They told me I needed to be on blood pressure tablets the rest of my life. And that's the further story. But I was papering over the cracks in 2005 by taking drugs. You don't need to see the detail of this, but measurement is key. Measurement is absolutely key. I was stuffing my face with as much vegetables and nutrient-dense foods as I possibly could. I then had my poo analysed. Poor person who has to do that job. But they had to analyse Nick Parker's poo. And they analysed for 17 nutrients in my poo. Okay, 17 nutrients. And if those 17 nutrients were all good, and they showed that actually I absorbed them, all 17 nutrients would fill this green column. But you can see that there's 10 boxes, 10 out of 17, in this high need column. Nick, your body really needs these 10 nutrients. 10 out of 17, and the middle one is 5. So 5 were borderline out of 17. And I was stuffing my face with as much vegetables as I possibly could. You're not what you eat, you are what you absorb. And your absorption can be corrupted by a lot of things, and guess what? My gut was nuked by chemo. Okay, I have a healthcare team, a wonderful healthcare team that I've selected, a nutritionist, a psychotherapist who happens to be in the audience. One of my best times I spend with her, it's fantastic. A personal trainer who also happens to be in the audience. Just an oncologist, a urinary lead, and all sorts of people. But I have to be the leader of that team. I have to call the shots, not the oncologist. And I have to be a person who displays some leadership skills. Sometimes, I think probably some quite brave ones that I haven't had to make before. Okay, people want to hear about my lifestyle. Here is my lifestyle. I exercise a lot, so walking is very, very important. And lifting weights, loading your body is very important. This is me at my workstation at the Cafe Nero. I have a pinger on my phone. Every 25 minutes it tells me to stand up. Every 25 minutes I then sit down. So I'm standing up, sitting down through the whole day. This is what I eat. So I used to eat about, damn 5 to 10 vegetables a day. I eat 75. At least I used to. I've reined back on that a little bit now. Okay, I put a cross through this green smoothie thing because I read in the bowels of the internet that all these people who are on green smoothies have got a shock coming, and it's called kidney stones. I thought, actually, the shock hasn't come to me. I've got kidney stones. I could gravel all of your drives with my kidney stones. And that's because oxalates are in vegetables, and I was just flooding my system with oxalates, and I had kidney stones. Okay, blood markers. I'm very good, and these are my successes. My blood markers are something that I are really keen on. So at diagnosis, I was measuring 37 blood markers. And of 37, there were 11 red ones. 11 ones that said, Nick, your body is not in a good state. Okay, 2 years later, this is just my lifestyle, changing my lifestyle, all of the things I talked about. Just 2 red markers out of those 37. And those 2 red were the results of my chemotherapy. Okay, 6 months later, and I've got a full house. Just my lifestyle change. My doctor said you can't do anything about your white blood cells. Your chemo, it nukes your bone marrow. Yes, it's your white cells are dropping off the cliff. There's nothing you can do about it. I went to my nutritionist. She said, of course, there's everything you can do about it. Eat some magic mushrooms. I ate magic mushrooms, and look, my white cells came up. And I'm now just eating lots of magic mushrooms, and my white cells are fantastic. First time in 12 years, no blood pressure pills. That happened in January. I'm back on them at the moment because of my sleep, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that was the first time in 12 years. And I've had 2 scans, bone marrow scans, annual bone marrow scans, and they said there's no evidence of disease in your bones. Okay, every month I go and have my blood tested for this thing called PSA. It's pretty squeaky bum time because that's my cancer marker in my blood. Okay, so I was doing my treatment, and this is the number 4 that I said we need to get below, and my number has been sitting below 4 for a long while. In May of last year I said, this stuff is really, the byproduct of not having testosterone is you get female menopause, and my wife didn't realise that I was going to beat her to female menopause, night sweats, hot flushes, getting moving, all that sort of stuff. So I said, I'm going to come off this stuff. Doctor said, you're mad, and he was right. Look, my cancer went up. I said, okay, I better go back on it. So my cancer came back down. I then said, right, I'm going to go and listen to these researchers who come over from the States. And the researchers came over from the States, and they said, what you need to do is you need to eat a really low-carb, ultra-low-carb diet. I said, okay, I'll do that. My cancer went up by 600%. I knew what I was doing. I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, Nick, what have you been doing? I said, I've been playing around with these things called IGF-1s. She said, no one has sat in front of me in 30 years talking about IGF-1s. You're the first person who's talked about IGF-1s. I said, yeah, I was playing around them because they're part of animal proteins, and I had to eat some animal protein to get this ultra-low carbohydrate diet. Anyway, doctor, what's my next score? She said, this is your next score. Come back down. I said, there you are, I'm back on my extreme vegan diet. And she said, I said, well, there you are. And then the next thing happened, which was that. And I'd just been away on a Vipassana retreat, 10 days of silence. No talking, no reading books, no social media, no diaries, no nothing. Just meditating for 10 whole days. Switching completely out of society. My cancer marker came down by 82%. I gave a present to myself in Christmas Eve of last year. I became one of a very small handful of people. 0.7% of the 2.5 million people living with cancer in the UK when I became in the small handful of people who live with stage 4 cancer in their 3rd year. I talked about sleep. This is now my poor wife has got to put up with my next experiment. This is my sleeping pod now to try and help me. I haven't slept past 1:30, so from 10 o'clock until 1:30 for a year now. So I've got to try and fix that because it's raising my blood pressure. Keep notes to self, keep this perpetual thing going on, keep experimenting. And actually, for me, it's not a journey of health. It's much more profound than that. It's a journey of being. And remission isn't my aim. Life is. And you're all going to be asked to do a pledge, as I said earlier on, and my pledge to you is whatever pledge you do, just think of something small, and you only need to make a 1% change in that small thing. And then find another 1%, another 1%. Find that thing that comes easily to mind. Don't stress about it.
Thank you so much, Nick. We've probably got time for just one question before the break. Would anyone like to ask a question? Yes, Ken.
Hi Nick.
Hey.
It's Ken here.
Hi, Ken there.
I'm really interested in the results that you put up, and so what are you measuring? How are you measuring? You know, your cortisol levels, and also the nutritional markers that you put up, moving from red to green. That's of great interest. So how are you physically measuring and keeping those scores?
Well, there's a fantastic person who's much more equipped than me to answer some of those questions later on. Helen will be doing all of that. But from my point of view, it's a whole gamut of things. So I send some of my stuff away to third parties Helen's one of the organisations that provide those sort of services. And it could be saliva on a swab, it could be my poo, it could be pee. It just depends on what you're looking for, so I'd be doing that. And then I have blood tests at my GP or at the hospital. And then at home I do a raft of things, like I have a glucose monitor, I have a blood pressure machine, weight is very important. I go and see Dave, and he does a caliper measurement of my body fat, which is really, really important. I'm running at about 13.5% body fat, which is kind of getting a bit sort of athlete levels, which is kind of, you know, it's not because I'm an athlete, it's because of the results of living well. So I think it's a very long answer, complicated answer to your question. It depends on what you're looking for. And I don't do them every day, the whole time. I just do them kind of depending on what my next project is. If that's some answer.
Thank you. And DPD are happy with delivering poo through the post, are they?
I really can't answer that. Don't answer how I get cannabis through the post as well.
Thank you very much.